The development of the toolkit was supported by the Schumacher Institute and COMEET. So first of all, I'd like to ask representatives of Schumacher Institute and COMEET to say something. So I will hand over to Ian to say something about the Schumacher Institute.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everybody. You'll have to excuse me looking like this because I'm admitting people into the session at the same time. So, but it's very nice to see you all. And it's sort of a very warm welcome from the Schumacher Institute. We're a fellowship organization based in Bristol, a kind of think tank. What we really like doing is helping people do systems thinking around complex issues. So that's our strength, and we were absolutely delighted to be asked to work on this toolkit by COMEET, and I would like to say what a brilliant effort both Katie and Richard have put in to produce this. Beyond the call of duty, I would say, and the effort they've actually put into it all. Obviously, climate change is an extremely interesting and desperate problem for us to look at. So we're going to be very interested to find out your reactions to the toolkit and where we can go with it from here onwards. We want it to be used, and that's the important thing. So please bear in mind that is what we're trying to find out tonight is very much where we can make the best use of it and get it out to as many people as possible. So that's my welcome. Obviously, if you want to get involved with the Institute, just drop me a line anytime, join our newsletter list and find out more about us. But I'd now like to hand over to Ross, who will say a few words about COMEET. Thank you, Ross.
I'm muted. Hello. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm Ros Wade. I'd like to echo everything that Ian said and echo our thanks to Richard and Katie for all their hard work, and to say how excited we are from COMEET's point of view with the end product of the toolkit on climate action. COMEET is an international fellowship based around community empowerment, and it's our mission to support communities with resources and coaching in achieving a range of aspects around the Sustainable Development Goals. And obviously climate action is one of the key elements of that. We have strong links to the regional centres of expertise, which are supported by UNESCO and based in based with the United Nations University. And these are regional centres of expertise in education and sustainability based right across the globe. And members of the RCE community actually approached numbers of us to ask for extra resources and support in moving forward with climate action. So we look forward to hearing your ideas as to how we can action all these ideas and put them into practice, and ask you to help us with disseminating and promoting work for climate action. So thank you again.
So thank you, Ian and Ros. So we'll now move on to the presentation, but Richard, if you could first of all put up the agenda slide.
Okay.
So
can you see that? Or
yeah, that's good. You could put it in full screen, but that's you've got
play mode. Yeah.
Perfect. So this is our agenda for this evening. We'll move into a short presentation. We'll have some Q&A, some breakout groups for you to discuss amongst yourselves and hear each other's experience, and then some feedback and discussions. So I think without further ado, we'll move into the presentation then. So over to you, Richard.
Okay. Hi, I'm Richard, Richard Erskine, and so we'll just get through this. Can you see the slides, everybody? Yep. Okay, so here you can see Commit and Schumacher Institute logos, and and this is an outline of the presentation. So we just want to give you about 20 minutes about a reasonable flavour of what the toolkit's about. So this is the, if you like, the front page of it. We debated about, should it be a website, should it be this, should it be 3 documents, should it be, we ended up actually with the production team ending up with a single document that's highly navigable. So it's a bit like, so wherever you are on the planet, you can find somewhere to download it as a PDF, but it's a very rich PDF, and don't think of it as a long document, think of it as a highly navigable resource. And actually, to get going with it, you don't need to read very much. You can get to the tools pretty quickly. And if you who are on the call want to share the resource with people, it's free to share, but we'd encourage you to use this link, which is at the top, because that's a landing page on the Schumacher website, and we can actually get some, if you like, some data on who's visiting that that page. And from there, you can then download this PDF. And once it's downloaded, you can then use it off-grid, if you like, wherever you happen to be. And I think am I handing over to you now, Katie?
Yes, that's over to me. So the toolkit aims. So we aim for the toolkit to be a companion for community groups. It's not a blueprint to be followed, but it looks to provide practical and accessible support to help a group think through their local situation and to decide on appropriate actions. It also helps to ensure a kind of range of views and approaches are considered along the way. And so we very much see effective and sustainable climate action emerging from within the community and not being directed from the outside. The toolkit also values and recognises the different levels of action, so personal and community action being important, as well as looking to influence wider systemic change. So next slide, please. So the principles, we aim to make sure the toolkit was widely accessible to different cultures, and we had an international group supporting us in commenting on the toolkit as it developed. We included tools to bring in diverse views and to help a group develop a common purpose and shared values. We assumed the group would be evolving over time, and we brought in systems thinking as a complementary approach to the more usual way in which we break down issues as we think about them. So next slide, please. So systems thinking can mean very different things to different people. It's a practice that encourages us to look more broadly at a situation and consider it in context, embracing the messy complexity of the real world. And it helps us to understand interrelationships and influences between things and actions, and to do this at different scales and time scales. It also helps us to look at what might be the underlying problems rather than the surface symptoms. And that's what this iceberg model is looking to illustrate. So we've kept our approach to embedding systems thinking very simple, just including a few very basic concepts. And we also include complementary tools that are more analytical, and these are equally important. So systems thinking allows us to recognize that change happens in all sorts of different ways. That's not always predictable, and there can be unintended consequences, which can be good and bad. It also recognizes that context is all important, and we can't transplant a solution entirely from one place to another, although we can always learn from what others are doing. And systems thinking always recognizes there's not one right way of viewing a system, and that everyone's different views can help to understand what it is that's happening and help to find a way forward. And that's something demonstrated on the next slide with the elephant model. So the story of the blindfolded people and the elephant, it demonstrates some of the important aspects of allowing diverse views to be heard. So encouraging us to think about how we all have a part of the story, but we don't necessarily have the whole picture. So we've got people feeling this elephant, and someone thinks it's a tree, someone else thinks it's a wall, somebody thinks it's a fan. So very different perspectives. And even if two people have the same experience, their subjective interpretation is likely to be very different. So the systems thinking principles that I've referred to are embedded into the various tools. So for example, the interactive and inclusive meetings tool looks to help ensure that everyone gets the opportunity to contribute, so diverse perspectives are heard. There's mapping tools to look at interrelationships. The revaluation tool is an interesting one, bringing to the surface and valuing less visible changes. We choose not to go too far into the mapping tools, actually, I was just going to mention. So causal loop diagrams is one approach to mapping, but we don't quite go that far because we thought there was quite a lot of training needed for that. But that would be a next stage that groups could go to. So we also encourage a group to think about how they would look to achieve outcomes. And that's something Richard will say more about in a minute. And then we like to think of the individual as a system with a head, heart, and hands. And so we're crucially looking to engage people's emotions as well as their heads. So over to you, Richard.
Thanks. I mean, when we're thinking about, I mean, the UN many years ago decided they wanted to talk about outcomes, not just outputs, because obviously it's outcomes that we want, not just deliverables, if you like. And there are a number of different ways to achieve those. A lot of the action that we see happening is through projects. And sometimes these may seem like things that it sounds a bit grandiose to call a market stall, for example, a project, but actually you still have to organize, you still have to do a rota, you still have to get people together. And then of course you can do more ambitious things like build a woodland or a solar park or whatever it is. But it all starts with issues. So there's issues that trigger the, if you like, this is the need, which is leading to the projects and then leading through to the outcomes. And one thing, I suppose this slide is really telling us that to achieve certain outcomes, you might need multiple interventions, multiple projects to achieve that. And a single project may actually address multiple issues. So it's always a good idea, I think, when one's thinking about projects, is to think both, why are we doing it? And that's the issues. And then what do we hope to achieve, which is the outcomes. Now, this is the framework. There's quite a lot to just chew over here, but it's inspired by the Design Council back in 2005. I mean, they didn't say this was original to them. They said it was really a universal design principle, which isn't just about designing towns. It's about designing anything, including climate action. And the idea is with this double diamond is we start off really trying to think broadly and divergently, taking in with no idea off the table in terms of what issues are we concerned about. So that's stage A. And then having done that, we then say, well, okay, for the next 6 months, or is it a year, or is it 3 months, depending on what cadence, if you like, a group wants to work at, it will then decide, okay, well, what are the issues we wish to focus on over the next 6 months? And it might be, say, it's air quality is a key one they think is a good one to focus on. And then the question is, well, okay, well, what ideas are there in terms of projects. And again, you might have a myriad of ones, and this is again a chance to be more open and free-spirited in taking on board whatever ideas people may have. So it might be, oh, well, let's do an information campaign, or let's do some air monitoring outside schools, or, you know, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you then have to decide, what are we going to do? So that's where we decide, oh, well, actually, this is what we're actually going to do. And all of those ideas that are harvested during this process are not thrown away. You can return to those, having done a project. Perhaps you've done a air quality monitoring thing out of schools, and the next idea is to try and organise a public consultation with parents and so forth, maybe at a school. So that might be the next project. Or you might go right back to the beginning again and say, well, let's have another. You know, we're now 3 years down the road, and we've doubled or tripled in membership in our group, and we now want to just see if there's new ideas that people have about what the issues you should be addressing. So that's broadly how this sort of framework works. And the point about this is that a lot of groups can be dominated by maybe a strong voice or a particular perspective, which ends up, if you like, excluding either quieter voices or more diverse voices. So a lot of the tools are around trying to encourage that listening to the different perspectives. It doesn't mean to say that one does everything all at once and not very well, but it does mean that one begins to understand that there are these other ideas that are coming forward. I think that's back to you, isn't it, Katie?
Yes. So what do we mean by a tool? So a tool basically is any kind of activity that will help your group to achieve its goals. A specific tool will either help gain a better understanding of what needs to be done, inspire others to get involved, or implement ideas in the community. And using a broad range of tools can help to maximize participation in the activities of the group, as different tools will obviously appeal to different people. And we'd hope that all the tools could be used in ways to help build the relationships between people in the group, and then to help build relationships with the wider community. So some tools can be used quickly in the first instance and then revisited. Others might be kind of more one-off, and it's entirely up to each group as to what they want to do. So there's conversational tools, there's tools for drawing diagrams together, there's some physical activities, and then there's some activities that explore emotions. So next slide, please. So this is just to point out that, yeah, so in this table, we recommend specific tools as the initial ones to focus on for a newly formed group, or an existing group, perhaps moving into considering climate change. This is very much a suggestion, and it's quite open, as many tools can be used at multiple stages. So next slide, please. So these next few slides are taken from the toolkit itself, just to illustrate the layout of the tools. So we've got a brief description of the tool. We say something about when to use it and the effort required and materials. So this one is brainstorming questions, which is a way of putting people on an equal footing, as those with little knowledge can ask questions, just as those with lots of knowledge can ask questions. So it can help a group to get to know each other whilst they explore an aspect of climate change. So this is setting out the sort of the what to do, the potential difficulties, and the suggestions on going further. And then there's an example here which draws on the work that Oxfam has done on climate justice. So that as an example for the brainstorming questions tool, and illustrating the sorts of questions that could arise in a group discussing this figure. So next slide, please. And this is just to note that we are very appreciative of the input provided by our group of international contributors and commenters, and for the support from the Schumacher Institute and COMIT. And Richard's now going to give you a really quick tour of the toolkit before we move on to Q&A.
Okay, so I just need to find my mouse. I don't know why it's being so. Oh, here we go. Stop sharing and then share again. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Great. So when the text was completed, we then handed over to the design team. Cal Fadesh is a document designer and Jenny Bowers is the illustrator. And we went through many different iterations and draft illustrations and so forth. And our suggested 3 separate documents were merged back into one because they felt that they would get lost otherwise. So all the resources are here together so that they never get lost, if you like. But it doesn't mean to say you have to read it from front to back. So we can very, I don't know why I'm not able to navigate this. Can you still see it can you still see it?
Yes, it's possible to see it like that. Yeah.
I don't know why I can't navigate it when I'm in full screen mode.
Oh, how strange.
Let me just try that. Okay, let me just see this. Okay, I can now. Yeah, so there's a getting started section, which actually there's only about 20 or so pages, which we'd probably recommend people have a look at, because it just sort of sets the scene, if you like. And then really we're encouraging people to get stuck in and start using the tools. And the tools will make reference to resources if people need them to help support what they're doing. So we've got here the getting started section is very much just sort of explaining what's in the toolkit. But at any time I can go to the top here and I can go directly to the tools. I can see an A to Z list of tools, or I can see them in running order. So let's just see them in running order here. I can take a tool like Rich Pictures and it will give me an outline here, and then I can jump to it. Or I can go back to, again, so I can use the back key if you like, or I can go right back to the contents. And again, the rationale, I think, is mainly for people who want to help mentor a group, to give them a bit more context, a bit more background on it. And then the resources has got a bit more on system syncing and so forth. And for example, project categories is mentioned in some of the later tools where people are wanting to decide on actual projects. So we've got here themes and categories, which are, it's not supposed to be an exhaustive taxonomy. It's supposed to be very much providing clues and hints on where people can think about things. And they say, oh God, I hadn't thought about what's public art about. So they can look down here and find public art is mentioned down here as one of the possible categories to engage the public in different settings through active participation and so forth. And in one of the tools, we've actually got an example of that. So I think that probably, and there are some templates that go with some of the tools. But we think that in most cases, the tools are designed to be able to be picked up without any prior training. Obviously, there is 1 or 2 which do really require a little bit of expertise, so or training. So, for example, Climate Fresk, the tool does explain that there is some online training that a coordinator would need to do. And I think probably some of these require more or less sort of facilitation skills, but in many cases what we're trying to do is not make this, as I think Katie mentioned earlier, where we've got, for example, diagramming tools, we're trying to make them quite simple to use. So if we look at rich pictures, for example, we explain what people can do, and then we give some examples of where this is used. I think we've got an example in one of the resources there of the use of rich pictures, for example. Okay, I think is that enough? Do you think there, Katie?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll stop sharing now.
Okay, so we now have some time for questions. If you'd like to either post them in the chat or put your hand up, you can either put a virtual hand up in Zoom, or if you put your hand up, your actual physical hand up and wave at me, that's also okay. Any questions? So we've got a question in the chat. Are the tools designed for in-person use, or can some of them be used virtually? I'd say that most of the tools are probably designed for in-person use, but that's not to say that quite a few of them could probably quite easily be also used in a virtual context. But we weren't kind of primarily working towards a virtual tools, because I guess our kind of definition of community was, we were thinking of people who are geographically co-located in the same community. So we were really thinking that people would actually be meeting face to face. Richard, have you got anything to add on that?
Yes, I think so, yeah. And because of a lot of the ways in which we communicate are non-verbal and so forth, it's we think it's likely to be richer, richer outcomes. But of course, it doesn't mean to say it couldn't be done. But yeah.
So, question to Mark.
Yes, thanks. It's really very informative, and I can see the value of it tremendously. One of the challenges that I've experienced in running climate change oriented conferences in the States, certainly the big one that we did was we had to have counselors as part of the conference team to allow people to basically decompress with the realization of what may or may not be about to occur in the next 20, 50 years. I haven't managed to, I've had a very quick scoot through the link that Ian sent with the whole toolkit. Haven't managed to see anything yet with that quick scoot through about how you are, or whether and to what extent you're able to support people through that sort of panic realization element that may come through in this sort of work.
Yeah, really good question. I would highlight one of the tools we've got, which is Active Hope, which draws on the work of Chris Johnson and Joanna Macy. I'd say that's probably the closest we get to the sort of thing you're looking for. So that is very much looking at people acknowledging their emotions and sharing them, and so certain strength coming from that sharing, which can then help to move forward into more active action on climate change. So that's one thing we've got in that area. Perhaps Richard, you've got anything to add, or also?
Yeah, I mean, we did think that we'd use the hands, the head, heart, and hands as a way of another way of categorizing the tools, but we decided in the end it was yeah, we didn't in the end. But there are certainly. I think the postcard from the future is very much a heart-based one in my experience. Yeah, when I came across it when we were down at the Centre of Alternative Technology, and we did this. We were invited to do it, and I tried to read mine out, which was a postcard to my granddaughter, and I couldn't get to the end of it. I had to get someone else to read it because it was sort of had a kind of really visceral, kind of emotional reaction to reading this thing out. So I think there are other tools in there that are if along that line, and we're not. I mean, at the end of the day, we've come up with sort of 25 tools. It's certainly not. There's a kind of philosophy around it, which is which in the principles and so forth. But people will no doubt have other tools that they may want to bring to the party as well. But we were very much wanting to avoid a kind of intellectual approach to this. We wanted something that was quite accessible to communities that didn't have, if you like, an academic background or whatever. I hope that helps.
Thanks. So yeah, I see somebody's posted something in the chat on that as well about eco-anxiety. So that sounds really useful. So if others want to post links in the chat, that would be great. Richard Helen.
Yeah, hi. That's thanks very much, folks. That's great so far. Reading through the toolkit earlier on, what occurred to me is that the communities may well have things already going on which might more or less fit in some of those systems, themes, and so forth. And so, in order to get a sense that maybe things are already happening, maybe one interesting exercise is to, if within your community, understand what is going on and just how you might categorize them, and then, as it were, plot them on a map, and then say, okay, that's great. I wonder how we might build on that. In other words, there's things going on. Let's not think it's a mountain to climb because people are already halfway up the foothills.
Absolutely.
It's a really good point. Richard.
Yeah, I mean, we have material in there which is about group formation, but also group refresh. So we do have material in there about, if you like, a group forming spontaneously out of where there is nothing, where there's a desert, but generally there isn't a desert. And it might be an existing group, like a women's group, that decides it wants to put an effort into climate. It could be Rotary or whatever, so they might not, it might be a group that wasn't formed around climate, but has decided to move in that direction. But irrespective of what this group is and how it's formed, one of the things we're encouraging them to is see them part of a wider ecosystem within the community. So relationships with councillors, business, churches, whatever. And to explore that network. So, one of the tools is around that. Remind me, Katie, about the mapping of.
We have an influence mapping.
Yeah. Sorry, my brain. I just had a brain freeze there. Yeah. So the influence mapping thing would be very much in that area where you'd say, okay, for this particular thing we're wanting to explore, say air pollution, who do we need to try and influence, or who is actually currently influencing? And there's another one there which is about a SWOT analysis and so forth. So there's a lot of aspects of this which are about kind of exploring opportunities for influence without having to own the whole problem. So that's very important in the community setting. I think there's another hand up as well. Joss, I think.
Yeah. Do you hear me? All right. Okay. Well, this beautiful toolkit is a joint effort, is a co-production from the Schumacher Institute and Commit, the Fellowship for Community Empowerment, of which I'm the chair. Our vision, our mission is to produce toolkits on, in principle, every SDG that is active at this moment, and which is also the climate action toolkit. Now, we are no project agency. We just try to deliver to the world toolkits that are to be used by people who like to reinforce their own community. And what we do not do is deliver teams of help to go elsewhere, somewhere, and produce projects to achieve certain goals. We try to inspire with our toolkits, and we also try to deliver good practices. So we practice the theories of storytelling. We gather, as was said before by Mr. Dibben, we try to gather successes from somewhere in the market, produce them and publish them on our website as a proof of what's possible in the world and what has been done already, and how you can contact the owners of these good practices. So you can find every detail of this within a short period of time on our experience center, where everybody who feels inspired by this toolkit, by these toolkits, can find the people who have worked with them and brought them in practice already. Is that clear? All right.
Thanks, Joss. You could paste a link to the other tools if you wanted.
You can find them on our website. I'll produce the link, or our secretary, Maarten, who is with us today, can do this for you. Hi, Maarten, and put them on the chat box. All right?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So we've got some questions in the chat. Barbara asking, how can I find the right tool depending on the time we have? And there are indeed some tools which can be done in a few hours and others which will take rather longer. So each tool has a really short section where we try to illustrate the amount of effort required. Though quite often a tool could be done in quite a minimalist way, and then it could be taken a bit further. So I hope that answers your question there. And then there's a question about elaborating on the health checks. And shall I say something on that, Richard, or would you like to?
No, go ahead.
So yes, Richard referred to the framework, and health checks is on that. And so that's about sort of maintaining the health of the group. And we've actually got a resource on that. So if you wanted to know a bit more about that, that's on page 191. So that kind of sets out kind of things to think about. So how much structure do you want in your group? A bit of structure is useful, but you don't want to be overly bureaucratic. So it's finding something that works for you as a group and isn't off-putting to people. And then there's various tips for working together, which drew on the earlier work of Commit in another toolkit. And then a mention of some of these more emotional tools that may be useful to periodically use as a way of allowing the group to consider their emotions around climate change. So that sort of just gives you a bit of a flavour. And we've also got a short section recognizing that, you know, sometimes a group will come to an end, and that's not necessarily a failure. That's just what happens. A group might have seeded lots of wonderful ideas in the community, and other things have kicked off, and it's no longer so relevant, so it gradually winds down. Yeah, so have a look at that section in the resources for a bit more information on that. So Richard, do you want to take are there any other questions in the chat?
Well, there was a few observations or points. Mike from Transitioners has got a resource in there, some complementary resources on resilience and psychological aspects.
It's great. And I did an earlier question.
Nick Drew has said in response to Mark's question on emotional support, in addition to actual hope, there's living with the climate crisis. So, yeah.
Excellent. Don't know that one.
I think it's, I mean, this raises a point. I suppose we know that, you know, this thing could be 1 million pages long if we had, if you like, expertise on everything from permaculture to psychology to doing renewables and so forth. And what we were very clear about is we're not providing that 1 million page document. So it's very much centered around this, trying to address this challenge that a lot of groups we've observed have, which is they may have done something, but say, what next? You know, that's often the question, you know, where do we go from here? So it's trying to help them make those next steps. But if the next step is to build a community garden, then there are loads of other resources out there on how to, you know, how to get how to plant seeds and stuff, which we don't have in this, obviously. Yeah, so that's really important to understand what we're trying to do with this toolkit, which we felt there was no shortage of these other tools that are around, which are more kind of quite often, you know, blueprints for do this, now do this. And this is very much saying, no, step back, work out what you want to do. And here's some things to help you work out for yourself what you want to do.
Thanks. And that links quite nicely to a question that I've just spotted in the chat that we've not answered, which is what is the expected starting point for using the tool in a community setting? Would you expect a single person or a small group to fully digest the toolkit and then figure out the best way to use the tools in their community? Or is there no expectation that groups self-organize and decide collectively how best to use the toolkit? And so I don't think there's any expectation that anybody is going to read the thing from front to back. I think the idea is that you would perhaps read the getting started section, talk to a few people, and see what appeals to you and whoever else is interested in getting going on this. I think it has to be a sort of very iterative process, starting somewhere and evolving from there. So it might be a single person starting, but hopefully then having a conversation with somebody and bringing on board 1 or 2 others to kind of then have a go at a few tools as a really small group, and then rolling it out from there. But obviously there are loads of community groups out there already doing other things who might want to kind of start thinking about climate change. Richard, anything to add?
No, I think you've got. I mean, one of the philosophies is there is no right way, and actually, the word companion came from, I think it came from Akpezi in Nigeria, was one of the names on that list, and that was something she came up with. She said it's like a companion, so we love that. So we picked up on that. As a way of describing it. So it's sort of in your back pocket in a sense, and you can pull it out and use it, and you know, in creative ways, you know, yeah. And we provided some hints as to when you might use it, certain tools, but it's by no means prescriptive in that sense.
Great. So we should probably move into the Zoom breakout groups in a minute. But Joss, I see you've got your hand up, or is that a legacy hand?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Katie. Well, now it comes to the question, how do we make this toolkit to a success in the world? I would like to advise you as follows.
But Joss, I don't want to be rude, but we are coming on to that on the second breakout. So if you're, it would be good if we could talk about that when we get to that.
Right, I'll wait some minutes, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we will come to that. And Richard, I see you pasted. Richard Helen, I see you put something in the chat. Okay, which we'll come back to. So we're now going to move into breakout groups for 10 minutes. And Richard, if you could possibly put the slide up with the suggested prompts for discussion, that would be great. I am going to paste them into the chat. And I'm not sure when you move into breakout groups, I'm not sure the chat will be available. So
if you can try and internalize these questions.
So yes, either internalize these questions or paste them from the chat. So hopefully they've just appeared in the chat. But have they gone in as a very tiny font? Sorry about that. I'm not sure why they've gone in. Are they legible?
It's basically, this is a reflection. The second breakout is more about action, which is what Joss was talking about. So this is reflecting on any experience you have and challenges, and also initial reflections on the toolkit itself. So
yeah. So that's the idea. So if you could briefly introduce yourself and then talk about your experience, any challenges and any initial reflections on the toolkit. And then we'll come back into plenary and hear your thoughts. So,
I think it's probably going to be a couple of minutes each or something like that, you know, to try and get it all within 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so over to you, Ian, to press the button, please. So we now have a bit of time to hear back from those groups on anything that came up in your discussion. And then we've got a second breakout group. So anybody want to say anything?
I could start if you like. I was in a group. I'm going to have to look. Bess, Anna, and Sheila and John. Is that right? And we talked about. We didn't get everything, but we talked about just where we were at different sort of levels of community engagement, and that. For example, it's you know, some people, we talked about, like, for example, like maybe people who haven't gotten to a stage of maybe critical awareness around sustainability issues, and who are just sort of going day to day, and maybe just engaging in the community garden is a huge step for them, and just weeding in the community garden, and they're not there to talk about peak oil or to talk about you know, biodiversity collapse or anything like that. And how do you reach people like that, and how do you engage with them, and how it's about, like, you know, meeting people where they're at, and it's about being gentle and taking time and understanding. And I think Sheila and Johnson had a really nice concept about the ripples, and they had the idea that their little group was a pebble, and you don't know the ripples that you make. And I thought that was a really beautiful concept. Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to add, Anna, Bess?
Yeah, I love that.
Okay.
Yeah, anyone want to add to that? Anyone want to report back from another conversation?
Maybe I can continue. I was in the group with Rose, Mandy, and Nick, I think. Yeah. I just think that our group really saw, like, the varieties, how we can use this tool in different situations and for different groups. And yeah, I'm really happy about that and really thankful for that toolkit.
Oh, that's good to hear. You saw different ways you could use it. Excellent. Any other reflections before we move into our second breakout group, which Richard, I think you were going to introduce in a minute, weren't you? Okay.
Oh, if you want me to.
Oh, go for it, Mike.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was in a group with Joe, Chloe, and Mark, and we were just talking a bit about, you know, when someone said on page 191, it was like, oh my god, there's what's on the other 190 pages, and then it's like, but actually, you know, I suppose I think about it as being like quite modular in that sense of like, you know, you can just dip in, you might only read like, you know, the intro and two of the tools, and that's great. That's what you need. That's what you need at that point. And Mark was querying about, you know, what level of scale. I mean, because I've obviously seen the toolkit, because I sort of commented a bit on it when they were producing it, and Mark was asking a bit about you know, like, what level of scale could it be used at. I mean, I was kind of correct in saying that, you know, that a lot of the tools are quite scalable, can be used with bigger groups, but a lot of it would depend on the buy-in. Obviously, you're getting towards the thing you're trying to do. So if you've got a local council which is really sympathetic, you might be able to do work with them and use tools to do that engagement or do different types of activity. And sometimes it might be that you're doing it with just a really small group of you in your community. So yeah, those are kind of some of the things that were coming up, and yeah, just generally like, yeah, I think people just need to give it a bit of a go, really, to see what works for them.
Thanks, Mike. I think Richard wants to come in on that.
Well, not specific on that. I was just going to say that in the group I was in, there was Susanna, Ava, Ruth, and Sheila, and they all were in groups that were either relatively new or were needing a bit of a kind of lift, and so they felt that they were, you know, it was a good timing, if you like, in that sense for them as groups. And Sheila actually made an interesting observation. She said back, this is a few decades, you know, I don't know if that's 20 years ago or 10 years, 15 years ago, the British Council had an active citizen toolkit.
10 years.
10 years, sorry, Sheila.
Right.
Which was somewhat reminiscent in terms of the style and approach, and that was extremely successful at the time, and groups in Cardiff and Sudan and Kenya were working together. So that's a nice little reference point, perhaps, to take forward. Yeah. Yeah,
and just to reflect on Mike's point, yes, I think you're right. It's kind of scalable, can be used at different scales.
Yeah. So yeah.
And yeah, Ros.
It was pointed out in our group that some of the activities and tools are really helpful to promote the sort of health of groups and development of groups generally, and that, you know, we acknowledge that was very important in developing the toolkit, that we were thinking of sustaining the groups over a long period and helping groups to think about how they form and develop and decide on their activities. It's not just about rushing into action and burning yourself out, which is what has happened to a lot of groups, where they're very enthusiastic and highly motivated and really want to make change, but they focus on one thing rather than focusing on the whole group and bringing people with them and taking it by step. And the process is the sort of double diamond process was very helpful, it was felt, to take that forward, as well as a number of the tools which could be used for group dynamics generally in all sorts of issues. So I think that was pointed out.
Thanks, Ros. So Richard, do you want to move us into the next sort of breakout groups, introduce those?
Right, so I need to just throw up the
I can paste the questions in the chat, but yes, if you want to just
So we've done that one. So this is the breakout group 2. Yeah, so I think I guess you don't need to reintroduce yourself, but it may be that I think it's going to be randomly allocated, isn't it? So it might be just a very short, hi, I'm Richard from Nailsworth or something. But I think this is now moving into kind of action. And I think, as Mike said, it's sort of just have a go, I think is the kind of what we're suggesting. You can't really make a mistake. In fact, well, if you do, you'll probably learn from it. So it's a question of how would you see yourself using it, and then how will you let people know what you've been doing, and maybe when we get back to plenary, Joss can return to tell us his thoughts on that as well. So, yeah, is that okay, Katie?
Yes, I think it's over to Ian to press the button.
Okay. I hope this works.
This meeting is being
Okay, so yeah, any reflections back from those discussions? Richard.
Yeah, hi. Well, yeah, we had a quick trot round the sort of application areas that folk had. But in terms of the important thing of how do you let people know, the first question was, who are we talking about? Is it just the people in the community, or are we talking about the community of users in this group here now that we're all looking at each other? And in which case, one of the really neat ideas that came back was, actually, could we use a wiki? And there are examples of wikis where, because they use a relatively standard format, you could have a sort of standard format feedback window for people to report back on how they've used the tool in what application, what project, what tools and techniques, and their commentary on how it went. And therefore we can then start to find, as I said, our new best buddies in Lüneburg or whoever, who could actually say, well, we tried this and this worked really well.
Interesting. Okay, yeah, we'll have to look at that one further.
Can I have the floor or the screen or whatever you would like to call it for a moment, please?
Go for it, Martin.
Both in the first breakout group and in the second one, I noticed that everybody is extremely enthusiastic about this toolkit and are dying to start working with it. So absolutely well done for the whole team, and Richard and Katie especially, I think. If you talk about how you would like to let the world know about the results of you working with the toolkit, may I suggest that you collect your information, send it to me, for instance, with commit.org, and then we'll make sure it gets published in our best practices section. We are always looking for examples of good practice of anything that people do in terms of community empowerment, and that will only make the experience that people have when they visit our website, or perhaps the Schumacher website. I'm not really sure whether they have a section like that too, but it will only make their experience better. So please do collect your information on good practices, send it to us, and you can, for the time being at least, use the info@commit.org address if you want to do that. Then it lands in my inbox, and I'll make sure it gets in the right place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We are coming up to time quite rapidly. Richard, you're on mute. I think if you're, I can see you're saying something.
Joss, did Martin cover what you wanted to say, or was there something else earlier about action?
No, I've said what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Martin and I usually know from each other on forehand what we are going to say. But no, my point was that there are two questions now. The first one is, how do we get this beautiful toolkit spread out all over the world, wherever possible? And in the second place, how do we get replies back from all those who have used the toolkit or have been active in the field already? My first advice would be to approach existing organizations, send them this toolkit and free, and advise them to ask them to use it in their own networks. I give an example. There is UNESCO in Paris with a special chapter on sustainability, with a lady who is charged with sustainable issues in education, especially the climate action ones. And I can contact you, I can contact Richard and Katie so that they can send this toolkit to her and ask them to spread it out all over the world. Then you have a global spread out, I can assure you that.
Okay, thank you, Joss. Thank you. That's much appreciated. And if people have got other ideas of organisations that we should be in contact with, or they want to just forward it themselves, then that would be well and good as well. I'm aware we've just got 2 minutes to go.
My second point was, if anybody would know any organization that could use this toolkit in its own networks, like Greenpeace, for instance, or others, please let us know. We can contact them for you and see that this toolkit will be read all over the world and be applied.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joss.
Richard, can we go to our final slide? I think you were going to cover that one, or I can.
Yes. Okay. So do you want to speak to this, or do you want me to speak to it? Katie?
Oh, go for it, don't mind.
Okay, yeah, so, I mean, thanks everyone for, I think really productive evening. So we want to stick to our promise of making it 90 minutes. But we will hope to do some sort of feedback session about 6 months. So 6 months is actually not a very long time away. So the message is actually crack on and just have a go with it with your groups, and just and see if we can't actually get some sort of early lessons back from you in about a 6 months time. Sign up to the Schumacher newsletter and we'll publicize the forthcoming session. But obviously in ad hoc ways, Commit have offered to do some assembling of stories, which would be great. And we could all do our bit, if you like, to try and share the tool, but also share feedback and experiences. Yeah. Okay, Katie?
Great. Well, I think we will draw it to a close there, because we've gone past 1:30. If you could stop sharing.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's great. So if you registered on Helm to come along, then we've got your email address, and we'll send you some follow-up from tonight. If you didn't log register your interest on Helm, then we've not got your emails. So please sign up to the newsletter or drop your email in the text in the chat now. But otherwise, thank you very much for coming. Really great to hear your feedback, and very much hope to see some of you again in 6 months, and do get in touch before then, because as we said, we're kind of very happy to have conversations with people in the meantime. So thanks a lot.
Thank you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to
Thank-
Katie and Richard. Brilliant.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Oh, like Daisy. Bye.
Bye.
Very good. 4 of us. Yeah.
Right. That seemed to go without a hitch.
I'll stop recording at this point.